Karl Tanzler, born February 8, 1877, in Germany, was a man who is often described as eccentric. As a young man, he claimed to have had been visited by angels whom brought him visions of women with dark hair and tanned skin who was predestined to be his true love. Living in Germany at the time, Tanzler knew his chances of finding a woman that matched his description were slim to none, so he packed up his family, a wife and 2 children, and moved to Zephyrhills, Florida, where he left them to take a job in the Keys as a radiology technician. In April of 1930, Tanzler met Maria Elena or Helen Milagro de Hoyos, a Cuban-American woman who was brought in by her mother for an examination. Tanzler recognized her almost immediately, the woman from his visions. The woman was, without a doubt, the woman he was supposed to be with, he thought. De Hoyos was diagnosed with tuberculosis, but her family did not have the financial means to have her properly treated, so Tanzler, pretending to be a doctor, offered to treat her at home for free. He would steal medicines and supplies from the hospital and would often bring her family money and small gifts as well. At this time, Tanzler was estranged from his family and began obsessing over this woman, the woman who was meant to be his true love. He was 53 at the time he was treating her and would often express his deep feelings for her. De Hoyos, only being 21 at the time and still legally married, although she had separated her from her husband after a miscarriage, did not reciprocate these feelings. Though she did not reciprocate his feelings, Tanzler's one-sided infatuation pushed him to keep treating her with the aforementioned medicines. For all anyone knows, this could have made her worse, as Tanzler was not a doctor and had no idea what he was doing. Just a year later, in 1931, De Hoyos succumbed to her illness and passed away. Tanzler paid for her funeral. However, instead of having her buried underground, he had her buried in a tomb, and he kept the only key that was made so he could visit her every single night. He injected her daily with formaldehyde and would just sit with her for hours, talking and potentially doing unspeakable things to her corpse. After 2 years of this behavior, Tanzler claimed to have heard her voice begging him to release her from the tomb. So that's exactly what he did. He brought her home with him where he took care of her. By the time he got her home, her body was falling apart and decay was evident. He stuffed her body with wire hangers, replaced her eyes with glass, and made a wig of her own hair. To cover the smell, Tanzler used oils and tonics. De Hoyos no longer resembled her true self, but more like a crudely made dummy of her. Yet this didn't matter to Tanzler. He still sat her up in chairs and interacted with her as though she were truly his wife. He even slept next to her every night. Eventually, the hospital Karl Tanzler worked at found out he was stealing expensive medicines and supplies, so they fired him. He now survived by receiving a check from his estranged wife. Tanzler lived only in a shack that hardly sheltered him, and instead of using these checks to provide him with proper housing, he used them to buy clothes for his corpse bride. She was his life-size doll. His neighbors finally seemed to become suspicious of what was going on. They knew he'd been living alone, yet they'd find him bringing home new clothes to his wife. They even saw him through the kitchen window dancing with what they thought was a dummy. Once it was figured out what was going on, the police became involved, and Karl Tanzler was arrested. When he was finally discovered, it had been 7 years since he robbed De Hoyos' tomb and started living with her corpse. The crazy thing is, when people found out about what was going on, they didn't see it as the disgusting and vile act that it was. Many thought he was just lonely and missed his wife. Others even thought it was endearing.